One of the things that people ask me all the time on Get Your Sax Together is, how do I record my saxophone? What's the best way of recording saxophone? So in today's free online saxophone lesson, you're going to learn all about recording your sax right through from using your mobile phone to an audio interface and a mic and a lot more besides. So we're going to take it from the beginning. But just before we do, remember, my free gift to you is my free Saxophone Success Masterclass. You can get that by using the link that you can see there. It's full of loads of awesome tips and tricks about playing saxophone. It can revolutionize your practice and change how you sound almost straight away. So go and check out the free Saxophone Success Masterclass. The link is also in the description. And without further ado, let's have a look at your options to record your saxophone. Let's start off with the quickest and easiest and most inexpensive way of recording your saxophone, and that is using the stuff that you've already got. Now, you've probably already got a mobile phone, and the mobile phone probably has a built-in voice recorder or a built-in audio recorder. So that's a great place to start if you want to just get going quickly. Equally, you can do this on your iPad or tablet. Or an even better option for a super portable way of recording your saxophone is by using a handheld standalone audio recording device like the Zoom units that you can get. As you can see from the picture next to me, they've got a built-in pair of microphones at the top of the recorder, and you can get some really incredible results just with that handheld item. Of course, mobile phones have come on a lot recently, and so don't rule them out as a perfectly legit way of getting started with your sax recording journey. Now, you need to have some sort of app in your phone to record with. So what are you going to record into? Well, if you're on iOS, you've got an iPhone, you can use the built-in voice memos from the phone itself, the native software, or you can use GarageBand, which is very good as well. That's an excellent app if you're on iOS. Now, I don't have an Android phone, so full disclosure, I'm stabbing in the dark a little bit here, but I've looked it up and there's some options for you. RecForge 2, Music Maker, and of course your Android device will also have a built-in recording app for your voice memos, so you could experiment with using them. Now, you can also plug a slightly higher quality microphone into the end of your mobile device or tablet. Either, let's say you've got an iPhone, there's a lightning connector and the microphone is built into the thing, or it's a wire that goes to a separate microphone, and you can get a range of microphones which hopefully will be slightly better quality than the built-in microphone in your mobile device. So make sure that you consider that as an option as well. Okay, now let's move on to our next tier of recording your saxophone, which is using a USB microphone. Now, a USB microphone just means that you've got a separate microphone that goes straight to a USB connector that you can plug into your computer. So this is a great option, and it represents a really big step up in quality in your recordings. Now, if you're on a Mac, you can record straight into GarageBand, which is free whenever you buy a Mac. If you're on PC, again, I don't use PC, but you can record into Audacity. I believe a lot of people recommend that. And the microphone is ready to go. It's just plug and play. Now, there's a range of microphones, of course, as you would imagine. And what I would recommend getting several different ones, if you can afford to. Make sure that you've got a return policy on there. And try out between 3 and 5 different mics. Just have them all in exactly the same place on your desk. Play something, switch the mic, play the same thing again, and see if there's one that you prefer. You might be surprised that it's not always the most expensive mics that sound the best. Now, this is true of USB mics, and it's true of normal XLR connector mics. Sometimes the best mic is the mic that sounds best for your saxophone, and it might not always be the most expensive option. So try some different USB mics out at different price points, and you might be surprised at the results. Hopefully you don't love the one which is the most expensive. And then once you've settled on one and you've played back, maybe get some second opinions, just send back the ones that you rejected. So USB mics are a great option, but if you want to take it up to the next level, the best thing to do is to have a box between the microphone and your computer. Now, that is called an audio interface. Some people call it a sound card. It used to be called a sound card. So this way you can record into exactly the same software programs that I would mention before. But, you know, once you start doing this, you probably slightly maybe veer towards getting better software to record into. So if you're on a Mac, you can, again, use the free GarageBand, or you can pay for Logic, which is a souped-up version. And there's other industry standard tools like Pro Tools and Ableton Live's another great one, especially if you're producing music. On your PC, you can record it into Audacity or use Cubase or any of these digital audio workstations. They're called DAWs, or DAWs for short. Any DAW these days is likely to be pretty good. So you can't really go wrong, honestly. Now, let's talk about these boxes. All the box does, the USB audio interface or sound card, it's not really a card, but some people still call it a sound card. It's a bit more old school. What it does is you plug your microphone into the box, and there's a knob which controls the level that your microphone will be sent out, and then the other end plugs into your computer. And your computer, these days you don't tend to need separate software to run the audio interface, although you might do. Your computer will see the microphone signal come in. Now, of course, you can vary the number of microphone inputs. You have the one that you can see next to me in that picture behind me has got 2. You'd be able to plug in 2 microphones at the same time. And you can see that there's also a hole in the middle, so you can plug in guitars and any other instrument for that matter. There's also a few other cool features for the music coming out from the computer. So you can plug your speakers or amplifier and speakers into the back of the audio interface. And there's normally a mix knob which will vary the amount of sound coming from the computer compared to the amount of sound coming from the mic. So when you've got your headphones plugged into this thing, you can balance your sound going in with the sound coming back from the computer, which is quite a useful function. So these things don't have to be expensive, but what it does mean is that you can then use practically any microphone you want because it's got a standard XLR connector on it. So this is a great advantage of having an audio interface. You can plug in any microphone now instead of just USB mics or using your phone. Of course, you can also plug in clip-on mics, either with a radio system or directly into the interface. Now, I wouldn't recommend using a radio system if you're recording at home if it's got a built-in wire. It just makes more sense to plug it straight in and not have that potential interference in the signal. However, here's a tip with clip-on microphones. I've got a clip-on microphone here, in fact. Don't clip the microphone actually onto the bell of your saxophone, because then you'll get all the vibration that comes through. Now, this is unavoidable in a live situation, obviously. So live, yeah, obviously that's what you're going to do, and that's exactly what it's for. So you can move around, but you don't really need to move around in the studio. So I would recommend, I sometimes just get a cup, like a coffee cup, and just clip my microphone onto the cup, and then I play into it like a normal mic. It also enables you to get enough distance away from the microphone, but we'll come to that just shortly. Now, it's worth noting that these days modern interfaces are so good that you don't need to spend a fortune on your audio interface like you used to. So, you know, Focusrite make really good audio interfaces, and a very popular one, which is actually the one in the photo you can see there, is the Focusrite Scarlett. My daughter has got that, and it's absolutely fantastic. Really great interface. I use a Steinberg U22, but if you go onto your local or online audio shop, you'll be able to see lots of great options for audio interfaces. Now, if you're just recording your saxophone, you only need 1 input, but it's not that much more to get 2, and then you could have 2 mics in your sax, but we'll come to that later, and you could also, you know, plug in things into your interface in stereo. So for my money, it's worth getting a 2 input audio interface. But yeah, great option for home recording, and even, you know, spending 150 quid, 200 quid, that's probably, you know, let's say around about 200 bucks. You'll get a really great result, and you can start to branch out the microphones that you use, which is one of the big advantages. So you're either going to use your phone, which is a microphone, or you're going to use your phone with a microphone, or you're going to use a USB mic or a normal mic in an interface. Where do you put your microphone to make your saxophone sound really fantastic? Okay, let's have a look at this. Now, I've got some photos right next to me there, and you can see John Coltrane, and you can see Michael Brecker, and you can see Joe Lovano, and they've got one thing in common: the mic is all in the same place, and it's around about maybe a foot from the bell, but it's up high. Now, I don't know if the John Coltrane angle is just confusing, but you can see from the photos that, and obviously looks like Michael Brecker is leaning forward a little bit there in that photo. If you stood up straight, it'd probably be around about the same height as the Joe Lovano photo. So you're looking to have that mic about a foot from the bell, and then maybe somewhere around where your left hand is, I would say, at a guess. And you can see this on countless album covers. One that springs to mind is The Sound of Sonny by Sonny Rollins. Although that one looks very close to his bell, I have to say. So around about a foot away, but here's the key thing. Make sure that you experiment while you're recording, have a little test recording, move away from the mic, move towards the mic, move the mic higher, move the mic lower, move the mic slightly off axis of the bell, because you might find that you get slightly less kind of fuzz and hiss over to one side or the other side. And the great sound engineers try and fix everything in mic placement before trying to correct it with EQ further down the line. Now, my good friend Bobby Osinski, who has just done a fantastic presentation in the Inner Circle membership, and by the way, of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't say that if you join the Inner membership, and there's a free 7-day trial, by the way, you can join the Inner membership for free. Go and check out that 90-minute session on recording your saxophone from one of the great sound engineers. You could even join for 7 days and then leave if you wanted to. I shouldn't be saying that. But anyway, in the Inner Circle, Bobby goes into this, and one of the gems that he shared with us is to consider putting a second mic about between your thumb and your pinky away from the mouthpiece. Try it both sides. This will give you a more realistic sound. Now, when I say realistic, I just mean that it'll be more used to what you're hearing when you play saxophone. So a lot of people really like it. So also remember, the further away you have your microphone, the more the sound of the room will matter. So let's just very briefly, before we move on to processing your saxophone sound, let's very briefly talk about your room. The room can be considered an extension of your instrument, so it's very important in the sound. And you should also experiment where you stand in your room. I've got to imagine most of you are either in a music room or a study or a bedroom or something like that. So in many cases, it might not be aesthetically okay to start throwing up big sound panels everywhere. However, the way your room sounds is very important to your sound. And if your microphone is further away from the bell, well, then you're getting more of the sound of the room. And if there's any nasty frequencies or it rings or like there's a slapback echo or there's a kind of whine in the room, then it's going to come across on your recordings. So the room is very important. And if you just go online on YouTube and you look at simple acoustic treatments that you can build yourself to try and control the way that the sound decays in your room, that can really make a big difference to how good your saxophone sounds, because there's no point in having a really expensive mic if your room sounds awful, because that mic will do a fantastic job of making your room, of bringing out that awful sound of your room. So that's really something that should always be considered when you're recording a saxophone. Just remember, the room is part of your sound. Okay, so let's now talk about mixing considerations. So what we're talking about here is you've got your recorded signal. Now, if you're just doing it in your phone and it's a very basic, you just want to make a notebook recording, maybe send it to somebody, put it in a forum, that's fine. You won't have much mixing to do, but try and put your phone in a good place to make your saxophone sound good. However, let's assume that you're now using a DAW, a digital audio workstation, and you have the ability to add different effects and things like that to your sax. Let's talk about that. So, like I mentioned before, the best sound engineers try and put the mic in a position which will get them the best, most natural sound without having to EQ it. That is the best policy. Now, the most expensive mic is not always the mic which is the best fit for your sax, like I mentioned earlier. So, you might want to consider experimenting with microphones, even at different price points, to try and match the microphone to your sound. For example, if you've got a very bright sounding saxophone and a bright sounding mic, then that might not be a good match. So if you've got a really bright sounding sax, maybe it'll sound really good on something like an SM58, which is like a darker microphone. But if you've got a very dark sound, then maybe one of the really expensive vintage microphones like a U67 or 87, that might work really well. So don't always assume that the most expensive good mic is going to be the best match for your tone. You're trying to match the frequency spectrum of the microphone to the frequency spectrum of the sax, and with a bit of experimentation, you might find a really good marriage. So that's the first thing. Try not to just think, oh, I'll just brighten it up after the event, because it's never as good as getting a good signal to start with. Right, let's talk first of all about reverb. Now, here's another awesome tip that in the inner circle we all learned from Bobby Osinski, and that is two things with your reverb. First of all, use pre-delay, and second of all, band pass the reverb. So this is a little bit technical, so if you're not a technical person, you might just want to dial out for a few seconds. Pre-delay means that when you play your sound, the reverb doesn't start straight away, which is true in a natural environment. As soon as you play your sax, it takes a bit of time for that reverb to build up. You want to use a pre-delay of between 20 and 100 milliseconds. Now that will give you a really realistic sound, and that little delay before the reverb kicks in will give your sound that clarity that you want. When I say band pass the reverb, you're going to roll off the low frequencies from that reverb, probably from about 500 to 600 hertz, you're going to roll it. And at the high end, you're going to roll off the top frequencies from around about 8K or so. Okay, so it's just the middle frequency band of the reverb which is going to come through. And this is one of Rudy Van Gelder's tricks, which everybody discovered in his studio once he passed away. What this will do is it will give you the impression that the sax is very present and in your face, and yet it's not, but it's still got that nice, warm, wet sound. So when I say wet sound, I just mean you can really hear the atmosphere in the sound from the reverb, but it doesn't swamp it or make it sound like you're playing a million miles away in the bathroom. And that's the trick with reverb that we learned from Bobby. In terms of compression, you don't want to overdo your compression. For those that don't know, compression is a form of audio processing where you incrementally make the loudest sounds quieter on a sliding scale. So you set your compressor, and if you hit a note, like let's say in musical terms, you hit the note of forte, it doesn't do anything. If you hit it at triple forte, it'll make that more like a double forte. So it'll round off the loudest sounds. Now, once you've taken off the very loudest peaks, then you can turn the whole thing up. So it narrows your dynamic spectrum. But it also has a noticeable effect on your sound, almost like it's kind of choking the sound. So you shouldn't automatically reach for the compression. And actually, there's another tip coming up with how you play when you're recording, which I mean, you shouldn't have to do that. So final point, if you're recording to a backing track and your sax is either too loud or it's too quiet, you just can't get it sitting in the mix, you've got the reverb trick. What you could think of doing is reducing the frequency range of the backing track where the sax is strongest. So this might be 2K, maybe 3K, maybe as high as 4K if you're on soprano, maybe a little bit lower than 2K if it's baritone or tenor. So let's say 2 to 3K on average. You're just going to notch some of those frequencies out of the backing track, and it'll let the sax shine through in that hole in the frequency spectrum. So there's a great tip. You might not even need to, before you start reaching for the EQ and making your sax brighter, try making the backing track a little bit duller in that saxophone spectrum. Right, as I mentioned, let's now move on to performance considerations. So, when you are recording yourself, use less dynamics than you normally would if you were just performing, say, live or in your practice. This is something I've discovered with experience. As you go down lower into the instrument, naturally that sound will disappear more once you start mixing it into a track. So if you play quieter and lower, your saxophone is going to disappear in the mix in comparison to the higher and louder bits. So the secret is not to play too screamy and loud up high, and to play a little bit louder and brighter down low. In other words, narrow that dynamic range a few notches so that when you're in the mix, your saxophone, each note of the phrase will carry through. Let the mic do the work. The microphone's there to capture the sound for you. You don't need to blast it like you're trying to carry your sound to the back of the Albert Hall. Okay? The microphone will do the work, and sometimes you'd be surprised that some of the greatest session players that you've ever heard actually don't play that loud. Their sound isn't that loud. So let the microphone do the work. And remember, it is a recording session. You don't have to do one complete perfect take. And you'll find that almost all the sax solos that you've ever heard and enjoyed are a composite of different takes. So find a bit you like, and then find another bit you like, and in your DAW, feel free to cut them up and put them all together. That's fair game, guys. It's fair game. So don't be shy about doing that. Right. Whew, that's a lot of information. So feel free to rewind the video and make some notes if you need to. So what does it all sound like? Let's do a few audio tests now and see what my same saxophone sounds like in different types of recording scenarios. That's all we've got time for this week. I really hope you enjoyed this week's show. Hopefully it's given you some great ideas how to record your saxophone, the best way to record your saxophone, and what mic to use when you record your saxophone. Okay, dokes. Like I mentioned earlier, my free Saxophone Success Masterclass is open 24/7 for you to go and help yourself to. Just fill in your email. You can click the link there, or the link is in the description. If you bought me a coffee, I very, very much appreciate it. Thank you so much. You are too kind. And every little fragment of caffeine really helps me to get this content out, so I really appreciate it. Until next week, where we've got more amazing free online saxophone lessons and great content, make sure that you practice hard, practice smart, and enjoy your music. Take it easy. And possibly a compression at the end. Right, that's way too much. One of the things